Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Hello, and welcome everybody to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. And I am still coming to you from the desolate void that is the film industry at this point. It has been said a million times, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but COVID has taken its toll on this industry, as it has every other one. And right now, at the time of recording, this stretch between the end of February and pretty much through the middle of March is a time that is going to be rough for the film buffs. With so many films being released early in the year so they're eligible for award season, and others being set for release later in the year so they have the best chance of having the most audience members turning out to go see them in theaters, right now is a bit of a rough patch. But to all the movie lovers out there, don't be discouraged. I see it as my job to find the best of the best and, in turn, inform you what is out there and what is worth seeing. So today I'm going to be taking a look at different films from varying genres. The first is going to be Netflix's new release, Moxie, which is set to be released March 3rd. And is directed by Amy Poehler. The second will be the much-anticipated, long-awaited follow-up to Coming to America, Coming to the number America, which is set to be released on March 5th via Amazon Prime Video. And the final film I will be discussing is actually set to be released only in theaters. So for the first time, I'm actually able to hype up a film being released on the big screen. And that will be Chaos Walking, set to be released March 5th in theaters and in IMAX. And while movie theaters are starting to open up in more and more places around the country, for example, New York is going to be allowing 25% capacity in its theaters starting March 5th. I'm going to spend the final segment today talking about the streaming services that offer the best movies. And I know there's been an absolute boom in streaming services. Viacom is coming out with Paramount Plus later in March. But I want to take a look at the main streaming services like Disney Plus, Netflix, HBO Max, and go through them and tell you which ones offer the best value and are providing the best movie content. So be sure to stick around to the end. You definitely don't want to miss that. And the first film I will be diving into today is Moxie, scheduled to be released on Netflix March 3rd. This film is directed by Amy Poehler, and when I first saw that this would be a teen movie directed by Amy Poehler, I thought it was going to be just like Mean Girls, as her close friend Tina Fey directed that movie. But Moxie appears to be the other side of the coin. The film centers around a young girl who is fed up with the way that there is a double standard at school, with the way teenage boys are able to treat teenage girls and essentially get away with it, and how she is left with very little recourse on how to address those issues. The lead character, Vivian Carter, is played by Hadley Robinson, who is a relative newcomer, as are many of the actors in this film. She's the daughter of Amy Poehler's character, Lisa, and it's really in that mother-daughter relationship where Hadley's character, Vivian, finds an answer to her problem and ways to cope with this hostile environment that is her high school. You see, Amy Poehler's character Lisa was heavily engaged in protesting when she was her daughter's age. So one night Vivian finds a box of old mementos from these experiences, and taking a look at it, she begins to ask her mother questions about her experience protesting things that she deemed to be unjust. And that is essentially how Amy Poehler summed up the movie in an interview to Entertainment Weekly. She said it's about a young girl who is seeing all of these things happening at her high school and realizes she wants to participate in trying to make a change, but she isn't sure how. And that's a pretty apt summary of the movie, and it also gives you insight into why the movie is titled what it's titled. While this film is adapted from a book by Jennifer Matthew, nevertheless, Moxie really just encapsulates what this film is about into one word. And I believe they're using the definition that means grit and determination. And it's conceivable to think that they're trying to use all the meanings of the word Moxie, including the one that means energy, pep, and know-how. Because when it comes down to it, this film is about a group of teenage girls trying to change the status quo and essentially usher in a culture shift. And it's not hard to see why someone like Amy Poehler would attach herself to a film like this. I'm not sure if many people know this, but Amy Poehler has a nonprofit organization called Amy Poehler Smart Girls, and the mission of that organization is to help young teenage girls find their authentic self, which is such a challenge for any person in their formative years to really know who they are and establish an identity. And high school, while it's full of a lot of great things, it can also be a place where people run into a lot of negatives that make them doubt who they are and cause them to have a negative view on who they are. So I think it's really essential that there are films like this and there are organizations like the one that Amy Poehler founded. And if anyone's interested in checking that out, the website is amysmartgirls.com. But back to the film at hand. I personally am very interested to see what this film will do in terms of constructing what the filmmakers believe the status quo is and how they deconstruct that. Again, this film is set to be released on Netflix March 3rd, and just from watching the trailer, you can get a good sense of the world that this young girl, Vivian, is inhabiting. In the trailer, she, for lack of a better term, is sexually harassed by the main antagonist, who is actually played by Arnold Schwarzenegger's son, Patrick Schwarzenegger. And she takes this issue to the principal, who refers to the incident as he was bothering her. And when she says, he was sexually harassing me, she says, don't say that word because then I'll have to fill out a whole bunch of paperwork. So right there, they're showing the hypocrisy of society in general. A powerful woman who is the principal of a school is approached by a vulnerable young woman looking for help, and she's essentially told, yeah, there's not much we can do about it, and that's just the way things are. And this is clearly something we see in contemporary society with the Me Too movement, the Time Is Up movement. Behavior that was at one time just written off as boys will be boys or it's stuff that happens is really being held under the microscope. And again, the way that this film is going to portray those behaviors, put them under the microscope, show the consequences or lack thereof, is going to make for a very compelling story. Another compelling aspect of this movie is the fact that so many of the cast members are relative unknowns. Amy Poehler, as I said, plays the mother of the main character. Ike Barinholtz is in it, as I'm sure most people probably know him from Mad TV, if you ever watched it. Clark Gregg, who most people will know as Agent Coulson from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Sydney Park is in it as well, and most audiences will know her from The Walking Dead. And Marcy Gay Harden is in the film as well, who has had such a diverse career from being in the Robin Williams movie Flubber to starring in the 50 Shades of Grey franchise. So those are probably the most well-known actors in the film, but again, they're playing adults in a high school movie, so at the very best, they're going to have supporting or ancillary roles to the main cast. The bulk of responsibility to tell this story is going to fall on a very young, very inexperienced cast. As I said, Hadley Robinson plays the lead role of Vivian Carter, and she's had a few supporting roles in films like Little Women, and she's probably best known for being a part of the Amazon Prime Video series Utopia. So it will be interesting to see how she fares in her first leading role. Another relatively unknown cast member is Josephine Langford, who has a couple credits to her name, including the film adaptations of the After book series, a series of romantic novels where she actually plays Tessa Young, for which she has won a Teen Choice Award. So she has a little bit of a film reputation, but it's always interesting to see fresh faces take on new roles and tell new and exciting stories. Another cast member in this film who is completely fresh-faced is Lauren Tsai, who is actually making her film debut. Prior to this, she was actually a comic book illustrator, doing several works for Marvel. And I guess something that's going to become a staple of my podcast is relating things back to my home state of Massachusetts. Her aunt is actually a restaurateur here, and she owns a restaurant called the Blue Dragon in Boston's Seaport area. And if you know the area at all, you know it's pretty hard to miss, given there's a metal dragon on the sidewalk outside. So, again, it all relates back to Massachusetts. But Lauren Tsai will be making her film debut, and probably the most recognizable name in this film will be Schwarzenegger, Patrick Schwarzenegger, that is, who is obviously the son of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Maria Shriver. And he is without a doubt the most experienced of the young cast members, given that he made his film debut all the way back in 2006's Benchwarmers, where he played Jock Kid number 3. So this film boasts an exciting young cast of characters, supported by a number of seasoned comedy veterans. So, it is going to be very interesting to see a film that is taking on such a heavy issue as self-identity, and in a lot of ways gender discrimination, while also trying to toe the line and deliver laughs to the audience. But I think with this cast and the talented directing of Amy Poehler, they're going to be able to deliver. And once again, I think this is just another tribute to the quality of product that Netflix pumps out. I don't know if it's the fact that they have just such good market research, or because they were the only online streaming platform there was for such a long time, that they have data points on what every single audience likes, what movies to make. Since they've ventured into creating their own original works, whether they have been played for laughs like The Ridiculous Six, or if they've been Academy Award nominated films like Marriage Story, Netflix seems to really know what resonates with audiences nowadays. And it will be interesting to see how that continues with the fact that there are so many platforms out there now, whether it's Peacock, Paramount Plus, which is being released, HBO Max, which may be delivering the highest production value for their original content. But despite all those competitors, Netflix is still the original, and it's still turning out quality material. And hopefully Moxie will be no exception to that. With Amy Poehler directing, this is only her second directorial feature. After her directorial debut in Wine Country, it will be interesting to see her on the other side of the camera, having seen her in front of the camera for so many years, and I have great faith that her skills will translate into the film Moxie, which once again will be released on Netflix March 3rd, so be sure to check it out. Especially if you are a fan of films that take on modern contemporary issues. And this film is having the issue of sexual harassment, and the implications of having to deal with that take center stage. And just from the trailer, you can see a few ways on how this issue manifests itself in American culture. Like I said earlier, with the scene where Vivian's character takes her issue to the principal, in what you think would be a moment where a fellow female character would empathize and relate to the main character's struggle, it is pretty much the opposite, where the principal sees the real issue here being that she has to deal with something like this. And just the hypocrisy of something like that, where a fairly serious issue is pretty much dismissed out of hand, I believe is a commentary on the generational divide about an issue like this, where the older principal, who is a part of the system and grew up under different standards and expectations, pretty much just sees this as something that is bound to happen and ultimately isn't such a big deal. Whereas Vivian's character is part of a new generation who is trying to change the status quo and really establish that this is unacceptable behavior. So the dynamics between characters of different generations and how they interact and deal with the issues that are going to be tackled in this film, I think is going to be one of the most compelling aspects of it. Again, we are living in a time where behavior that at one point was commonplace and was pretty much par for the course is now being put under the microscope, to the point in many ways it's being phased out of modern society. And there are tangible repercussions for actions like sexual harassment, and how there is now a live-action adaptation portraying that issue in Moxie, which Amy Poehler describes as a coming-of-age film, where it is mainly about young women finding their voice and finding out what they are angry about and what they want to change. So seeing a film that tackles that issue and is geared towards an audience of young women, it will be compelling to see the reaction that people have to it. And once again, audiences will be able to react to this movie when it debuts March 3rd on Netflix. The film stars Hadley Robinson, Josephine Langford, Laura Tsai, Patrick Schwarzenegger, Amy Poehler, who also doubles as the director, Ike Barinholtz, Maurice Gay-Harden, and Clark Gregg. And Moxie will be charged with the difficult task of being both a thought-provoking drama and an enjoyable comedy. So it is going to be interesting to see the balance that the film strikes in that regard. Right now, we are going to be taking a little break, but be sure to stick around, as coming up, we are going to be talking about the film set to be released in theaters and IMAX, Chaos Walking. It has all the elements to be a big blockbuster, so you aren't going to want to miss what we have to say about that one. And be sure to stick around till the very end of the podcast, where we will be diving into platforms such as Amazon Prime Video and Netflix, going over which ones are really worth having and which ones provide the best content for movie lovers. So in this time of belt-tightening, if you are paying for multiple streaming services and are looking to cut down or just trying to eliminate the ones that are unnecessary, I'm going to dive into the ones that offer the best quality content and shed light on the ones that are really inferior to the competition. So be sure to stick around, as we are going to be ranking the most popular streaming services from worst to best.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. We just finished wrapping up talking about the new Netflix film Moxie, which is directed by Amy Poehler and will be available for streaming March 3rd, and is a film that tackles the issues surrounding young women having to grow up in a toxic environment and how it is essential for them to find their voice so they are able to speak out against such issues. So be sure to check it out. The next film I wanted to discuss was one that has the billing of a big blockbuster film and is set to be released in theaters March 5th, and that is Chaos Walking, and it has been in development hell for going on a decade at this point. This is an adaptation of the first book in the Chaos Walking trilogy by Patrick Ness, which is The Knife Never Letting Go. It was announced all the way back in 2011, and here we are a decade later with the film only now being released. And this film seemed like it went through every issue under the sun, from scripting issues with the script having to be rewritten, with multiple people being brought in to write and rewrite the script multiple times, which took almost 5 years until a director was finally announced, Doug Liman, who is probably best known for directing The Bourne Identity, with Chaos Walking allowing him to return to his action movie roots. But even with an experienced director like Lehman in the picture, this film has been delayed for almost 4 years, given that its principal photography wrapped up in 2017, and it was originally set to be released March 1st of 2019. But due to the critical response from test audiences, it was pulled from release that year and has been undergoing reshoots ever since. And here we are so many years later, with it set to make its theatrical debut in America March 5th. It did make its world premiere February 24th in South Korea. And like I said in the intro, this just feels like a movie with big blockbuster elements going for it. While I'm unfamiliar with the Chaos Walking sci-fi novels, doing research for this podcast, I did find out that they have a huge fan base, and I guess that this first film will be the determining factor on if the second 2 books in the franchise will be adapted. And it does have a lot of positive elements going for it. In addition to the director, Doug Liman, the main stars of the film are Tom Holland, which everyone knows from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where he plays Spider-Man. Daisy Ridley is the other star, and everyone knows her from the latest Star Wars trilogy. Mads Mikkelsen is doing what he does best, playing a sinister villain. And even Nick Jonas is in this film, playing his son. So just from the combination of the 3 main cast members, and I guess Nick Jonas for all the fans of the Jonas Brothers out there, this film would be worth seeing solely to see the interactions that those actors have with each other. And it's always enjoyable when films that have that big science fiction, beyond this earth type feel to it, still have elements to enjoy beyond that. And the setting of this film is fairly interesting, with it being set on Earth in the not-too-distant future, with Daisy Ridley's character crash landing onto the planet. And on this version of Earth, all the women have disappeared, and all the men are afflicted by something that's referred to as the noise, which is a force that puts all their thoughts on display. That sounds like a not-so-subtle allegory to social media, but we'll go with it being this powerful, mysterious force that they have to deal with in this film. And for those of you thinking the premise sounds a little outlandish, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Then again, that's what a film like this is supposed to be doing, putting us in out-of-this-world situations. And here's hoping it doesn't turn out to be a flop, given that the budget was over $125 million. And the runtime on this film is a little surprising, given that big sci-fi fantasy epics like this tend to be on the longer side. It's only 109 minutes, so it is a little on the short side. But if you have the time, are a fan of either Tom Holland or Daisy Ridley, definitely check it out. This film is actually going to be released in theaters and in IMAX, so if you've been looking for a reason to get back in the movie theater, and you are looking for something in the action-adventure category, definitely check out Chaos Walking. And if this adaptation is anything like the book series, it should be fairly thought-provoking. The title of this series comes from a line in the first book, which is as follows: "The noise is a man unfiltered, and without a filter, a man is just chaos walking." Again, the noise in this film is this force that essentially just projects someone's thoughts without their control. And I said earlier, it's sort of an allegory to social media, but that is kind of what our society is devolving into, where people just throw out whatever they're thinking at the moment without a second thought. And Patrick Ness, the author of the original trilogy, which this film is based off of, is making the commentary that's just utter chaos. And it will be interesting to see how the two main characters, played again by Tom Holland and Daisy Ridley, cope with this way of life, and the interpretation that is made about how two adolescents are dealing with living in a world where everything's completely unfiltered, with people's most private inner thoughts pretty much being on display for everyone to see. And of course, this is an extreme exaggeration of the role social media has in our society. It's not like social media and posting and sharing is something people are doing against their will, as it is in the world that Ness has created. But the idea that your private, most intimate thoughts can basically be broadcast to the world without even realizing the implications of what that is going to cause is something that I think is pretty overlooked in our society. And I'm pretty interested to see how that is tackled in this film. And there's a whole other subplot about the dystopian society they live in, but I'm really interested just to see the concept of not being able to conceal your thoughts, and those being as accessible as seeing your face in this setting. Because I think that by itself is a pretty compelling plot device, and it will be interesting just to see how that plays a role in the story. And it makes me just wonder what it would be like if that was the way things were. I agree that in many ways it would be chaos, not being able to conceal or contain your thoughts. I mean, just imagining a world without private thought would be pretty bleak, but then again, could be somewhat liberating to live in a world where you don't have to hide your true thoughts or feelings on things. Could simplify a lot in terms of just relationships with people you disdain, which everyone has in some shape or form, where you have to put up an appearance for someone that you really don't care for. But because we live in a society, you are expected to be polite and respectful. If we lived in a world like this, could just simplify all that out. And you only have to be around people you actually enjoy, and people you're comfortable sharing your innermost thoughts with. Now, I'm sure it wouldn't be as simplistic as that, and a lot more conflicts would arise, but it's nice to imagine a world where you can eliminate meaningless relationships like that and just whittle it down to the people who you are comfortable hearing your innermost and private thoughts. So it's a very interesting concept that Patrick Ness cultivated for his book series. The first of which, The Knife of Never Letting Go, which Chaos Walking is the adaptation of, in addition to the subsequent ones, The Ask and the Answer, which is the second installment in his book franchise, and Monsters of Men. Now, I'm sure the success of this film is going to determine on whether or not there will be adaptations of the next two books made, which I find pretty strange given the criteria that Hollywood studios look for when they're making movies nowadays. This is a story that has a pre-sold audience from the people that have read the books. It has the potential to be turned into a franchise to get people invested in the long haul and get them coming back multiple times. And it has two of the most recognizable young actors on the planet in the leading roles in Tom Holland and Daisy Ridley. Additionally, it has a pretty fresh and original concept going for it, which just begs the question, why did it take 5 years to get a script written when there's already source material in a 500-page book? Why then after that, when the original principal photography had wrapped, they had to scrap the original and go through extensive reshoots that took almost 2 years, which resulted in the film's overall release being pushed back by almost a full 2 years, which really just make me wonder what this film has in store as a whole. The books garnered largely positive reviews, but it is all too common for a great source material that is being translated to the big screen experiences a lot of issues in translating the story from one medium to the other. And I really hope that isn't the case with this adaptation. Hopefully it's not, because the author of the books, Patrick Ness, ultimately was brought in to help finish writing the final script. And this film could play an important role in just reopening the theater industry, getting people back into the theater. Again, this film is set to be released on March 5th, and that's the same day that New York City is going to start welcoming back audiences into their theaters at 25% capacity. Again, it's not going to be like a knockdown, drag-out blockbuster, but having people in the theaters is going to mean a lot to the film industry. And having quality movies in the theaters for people to go see is of the utmost importance. So when I see a film like this that has two incredibly young, popular superstars in it, is the first installment of a trilogy, I'm definitely rooting for it to at least deliver on its billing. And as of right now, there is no insight into how the film has performed. There are no reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, which I just want to clarify, I'm not one of these people that treats Rotten Tomatoes like it is the holy grail of movie reviews. They're very inconsistent. And additionally, to anyone out there, don't judge a movie based off what someone else has said about it. See a movie and form your own opinion. And for this one, I'm really hoping for the best. I think Tom Holland and Daisy Ridley are two actors with incredibly bright futures ahead of them. Mads Mikkelsen is probably best when he's in the role of the bad guy, and he gets to take on the role of a very compelling character in this one. And it'll be interesting to see Nick Jonas in an acting role. I'm not terribly familiar with the Jonas Brothers music, but I think it's always interesting when stars cross over. I know he does have some acting experience in those, I'll go with calling them wholesome Disney Channel movies, Camp Rock, so it'll be interesting to see how he fares in a more serious setting. And to give a quick synopsis of that setting, the film Chaos Walking, based off the first installment of the Chaos Walking trilogy by Patrick Ness, is set in a dystopian future Earth where all the women have died and all the men on the planet are plagued by this force called the Noise, which is essentially the inability to keep your thoughts private. So in this fictional Earth, what someone is thinking internally is displayed to the people around them, and they have absolutely no control over it. And in this world, Daisy Ridley's character is from a different planet. She crash lands onto Earth, and she encounters Tom Holland's character. Meanwhile, Mads Mikkelsen's character is the ruler of this dystopian society, and Nick Jonas plays his son. So there are going to be a lot of interesting relationship dynamics where the noise manifests itself. I assume Tom Holland and Daisy Ridley's character are supposed to be romantically involved, so it's going to be interesting for Tom Holland's character having romantic thoughts about someone and being unable to keep it private from them. And the other main relationship in this film, Mads Mikkelsen's character and Nick Jonas playing a father and son, it will be interesting to see that dynamic of not being able to conceal anything from your father, or conversely, a son being completely aware of his father's true feelings about him. I think that concept in and of itself is going to be worth exploring in this film. And I know I touched on that idea a little bit on if the noise was present in the real world and you were unable to conceal your innermost thoughts to the people around you. I really do think there would be some positives that come of it, from just simply knowing where you stand with people. And people that are super manipulative would have no legs to stand on. But those examples aside, of course there would be negatives to not being able to have your own private thoughts. Privacy would be a thing of the past. The World Series of Poker would have to shut down immediately. Nonetheless, it's a very interesting concept to consider, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out and what situations people are put in the film Chaos Walking. Again, the name of this film and the book trilogy is drawn from a line in the books where they're talking about the noise and how the noise is man unfiltered. And without a filter, man is just walking chaos. This calls to mind the many ideas that separates human beings from animals, which is not a new topic in literature or medium by any means, but it will be interesting to see the new ways that it is explored in this film, and this pretty fresh concept of people being unable to keep their internal thoughts internal. Again, I believe this is to be interpreted as an allegory to social media and just the general openness of the world today in the digital age, and how the most private information people have is out there and exposed. So hopefully this film can deliver on imparting a strong message to the audience as well as being entertaining. So, wrapping up, the film is Chaos Walking. It will be available in theaters and IMAX March 5th. Once again, it stars Daisy Ridley, Tom Holland, Mads Mikkelsen, and Nick Jonas. So if you've been looking for a reason to go back to the movie theater, this one will only be available in theaters. So be sure to check it out. Right now we are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we are going to take a look at...
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back, everybody, to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcasting Network. We just finished talking about the upcoming sci-fi fantasy film, Chaos Walking, which is set to be released in theaters and IMAX March 5th. It stars Tom Holland and Daisy Ridley, and is set in a dystopian future where the world is plagued by a force known as the noise, which causes everyone's thoughts to be projected to those around them. And again, that film is set to be released only in theaters, so if you're looking for an excuse to go back to the movie theater, be sure to check it out. And be sure to stick around until our final segment, where we will be discussing which streaming platforms provide the best movie content. But right now I wanted to discuss a new release coming to Amazon Prime Video, and that is Coming to America, the sequel to Eddie Murphy's 1988 film of the same name, only in this one the 2 is actually the number 2, which I'm always a big fan of when movies do that when they are afforded the opportunity. I don't know about the rest of you, but I was personally very disappointed when the Zoolander sequel was not entitled Toolander. And while it may be difficult for the purposes of this podcast when I'm referring to an original film and a sequel of the same name, with the only way to differentiate the two being the way they are spelt, I still think it's a very clever way to market the film. But it is interesting that this film is coming out at all, given that it is being released 33 years after the original. And I know there has been talk about making a sequel to the original Coming to America. I'm kind of perplexed as to why it's coming out now, but the main reason I see is the fact that Eddie Murphy currently has 10 kids, and I'm not going to hold it against him for picking up a nice paycheck for this film. Now, the original release date for this film was going to be December 18th, 2020, but as with many projects, it was pushed back due to COVID. It is now set for release on March 5th via Amazon Prime Video, so if you have that subscription, you'll be able to check it out. And the plot of the film centers around Eddie Murphy's character, Prince Akeem, who is set to become king of the fictional African country Zamunda, discovers that he has an illegitimate son that he never knew about from his time spent in America during the events of the first film. So his father's dying wish, who is played by James Earl Jones, reprising his role from the previous film, is that Prince Akeem finds his son and grooms him to become the crown prince. So Prince Akeem and his friend Semi, who is played by Arsenio Hall, reprising his role from the previous film as well, set off to America in order to find his son. So, much like the first film, it's set up to be a fish-out-of-water type film, only now with Eddie Murphy character's son, who is played by Jermaine Fowler, being the one who is experiencing culture shock. Other notable cast members include Leslie Jones, formerly of SNL. Good to see she got something else to do other than Supermarket Sweep. Tracy Morgan, Wesley Snipes, James Earl Jones, like I said earlier, John Amos, Morgan Freeman, and even Rick Ross will be appearing in this film as himself. So this film has an incredibly funny, star-studded cast, and has the potential to be just as funny as the original. And taking a step back, I want to take a look at why this film was made, and why 33 years later, other than the fact Eddie Murphy would love to collect a paycheck, is this film being made? Like, I'm aware that the film has a cult following, and there's been a rabid audience clamoring for a sequel ever since it's been released, but as far as why this film franchise is being revived after so many years and a sequel is being made, and released 33 years after the original, it just begs the question as to what is the point of it? I know that there's a general rule out there right now that if a movie is to be produced, it's better to go with one with a pre-sold audience, such as an adaptation of a book or a sequel to a movie like this, but it just makes you wonder what is the rationale behind releasing a sequel like this 33 years after the original. And trust me, I have no complaints about Eddie Murphy being in a new movie. I love Eddie Murphy ever since I was a kid, and he's one of the funniest entertainers in the history of American comedy. And in an interview with Al Roker, Eddie Murphy said he wasn't doing movies anymore for money grabs. He was only going to be in a movie if he thought it was quality and if his fans would enjoy it. So he clearly thought that the story of coming to America would be something that his fans would enjoy and would only add to his legacy and not diminish it. And he said the impetus for making a sequel came from just the fact that the original became so popular and an underground cult hit over the years, in the sense that of all his movies, he saw that people were dressing up like the characters on Halloween. And apparently one year VH1 had a all-day Coming to America marathon where they just kept replaying the movie over and over again. So once he saw the enduring popularity of the film, he started to think to himself, if I could get a sequel together, there would definitely be an audience for it, and people would go see it. Now, he was right in the sense that there is an audience for this film. Unfortunately for him, a worldwide pandemic happened, and people were robbed of the experience of going to see it in the theater. But again, the film will be released on Amazon Prime Video, March 5th. So if you have a subscription, you can check it out there. And I just think it's ironic that this film was made by Paramount Pictures. They had to sell the rights to Amazon Prime Video in order to recoup some of their losses from it not making it to theaters. And now Paramount is releasing their own streaming service, so they were a little slow on the uptake with that. So they missed out on having it on their platform, but you don't have to miss out on it. All you need is Amazon Prime Video subscription to check out Coming to America, which is set to be released March 5th, so be sure to check it out. And just to get back to a little bit of context around this film, and reference the interview Eddie Murphy had with Al Roker, again, Eddie Murphy credits the first Coming to America as really one of the first movies with an all-black cast to really have success all over the world. And it's interesting to see that the sequel is coming out in a time like this. I know that the film has been in development for a few years, and that it was going to come out regardless of the events that happened in the summer of 2020, but the commentary that this film is going to have on race in America and what it's like to be a black person in America is going to be pretty interesting to see. Which again gets into the topic of diversity and fair representation in film that Hollywood has been dealing with for the past couple years. And in retrospect, just seeing how much of an issue this was, it's kind of crazy to think that the original Coming to America, which was released in 1988, was a film that had an entirely black cast. And yes, it's kind of obvious when you consider the story of how it's an African prince coming to America. And even though it was panned by critics at the time, this film has really become a cult classic. And yes, having a star with the staying power of Eddie Murphy in it, and a supporting cast with people like James Earl Jones and Arsenio Hall in it, that helps a little. But I don't see the adventures of Pluto Nash being played. So there's something about this film, whether in its just pure entertainment value or the messaging of it, that really resonates with audiences. And the fact that it has gotten this sequel after so many years is just more proof that audiences connect with this story. And whether that is black audiences, whether it's mixed audiences, doesn't really matter. Which I think is really just the message of this whole diversity and inclusive movement, that we don't live in a world where the idea of separate but equal has to apply to filmmaking. And Coming to America just seems like a movie for anyone who enjoys comedy, anyone who enjoys Eddie Murphy, anyone who is a fan of the original. And it's probably hyperbole to say this, but I think films like Coming to America are incredibly important in the ongoing fight for diversity and inclusion in mainstream cinema. And I'm sure that the filmmakers didn't set out with the idea to be an important step in the movement for inclusion and diversity. I mean, Eddie Murphy is the writer of the film. I'm sure he just had it in his head that he wanted to create a fun, entertaining movie and deliver a good follow-up to the original, which people have just come to love over the years. And that's something I think we just have to remember when it comes to film. Most people who make a film aren't going into it with the intent of causing a culture shift. A lot of people are just going in to make a film because they want to make an entertaining, compelling story. And while Coming to America does have a lot of layers to it in the backdrop, with it having almost an entirely black cast, it's about a man coming from Africa and adapting to American society. The whole intent of this film is to entertain people. It came out of the rabid fandom that Eddie Murphy saw around the original. And though films can have powerful, poignant, topical messages, at the end of the day, it's really just to give people an escape. And in a time when people need escapes more than ever, I think a film like Coming to America that gets people nostalgic for the original, while also providing fresh takes on contemporary society, could resonate with audiences in a huge way. Again, this film came out in 1988, over 33 years ago. We have had two different President Bushes since that time. We have had the first African-American president in Barack Obama and the first female African-American vice president in Kamala Harris. Whether the film makes mention of either of those events is yet to be seen, but just the mere fact that such groundbreaking historical events have taken place since the original came out, it's not only interesting from a historical perspective, but just measuring the two films side by side and taking a look at the jokes from the original that probably wouldn't fly today, and how this sequel is adapting the characters from the original to the modern time period. And I really am hoping that Eddie Murphy's telling the truth when he says he doesn't do movies anymore for money grabs, and that he only does a movie if he thinks the story is good and it's going to resonate with an audience. Again, I can't hold it against an actor for doing a movie to get paid, but if at this point in his career he really is just in it to put out quality work and put out movies that he thinks his fans are going to enjoy, then Coming to America has all the makings to be a quality film. And to reiterate, the plot of this film is Eddie Murphy's character, Prince Akeem, is set to become king as his father is ailing, but his father's dying wish is that he finds his estranged son and teaches him about his heritage from the fictional country Zamunda and groom him to become the new crown prince. So whereas the original film was Prince Akeem wanting to learn more of the world and become self-sufficient, this film is going to center around a character who has grown up without a father, who all of a sudden is being told that he is the heir to a wealthy African nation. So much like the original, this film is going to be based around the fish out of water concept, where Jermaine Fowler's character is not only introduced to his father for the first time, but a completely different culture, and is going to have to learn a new way of life. And without even going into the commentary that these films have on being black in American society, mostly because I'm definitely not qualified to speak on that, this latest installment, Coming to America, will probably have a lot to say about being black in America, but ultimately this isn't a film meant to cause derision or force people to deal with the issue of racial inequity. Ultimately, this is just a movie meant to entertain and give some people some laughs, just as the original one was. So once again, the film is set for release March 5th on Amazon Prime Video, and it has an incredibly funny cast, headlined by Eddie Murphy, of course. And he is accompanied by a cast made up of people like Arsenio Hall, Jermaine Fowler, Leslie Jones, Tracy Morgan, Kiki Lane, Wesley Snipes. Legendary actors like James Earl Jones and Morgan Freeman appear in the film, in addition to comedians like Louis Anderson and musicians such as Rick Ross and DeVito making appearances in the film. So be sure to check it out. This film is 33 years in the making. It is directed by Craig Brewer, and this is his second collaboration with Eddie Murphy, having previously worked with him on the Netflix original Dolomite Is My Name. The film's runtime is only 104 minutes, so it is not that big of a time commitment, and I'm sure it is good for a laugh or two. So be sure to check out Coming to America, starting March 5th on Amazon Prime Video. Right now I'm going to take a little break, but coming back, we are going to discuss the vast array of streaming platforms that are now available to people, and which ones are worth having, and which ones, quite frankly, are delivering inferior content. But just to clarify, I'm not going to be going into every single streaming platform there is out there, because pretty much every independent channel now has a streaming platform. For instance, platforms like AMC Plus and National Geographic Plus are ones that I'm not going to be taking a look at, because those are pretty individualized and niche streaming platforms. I'm talking about the main ones like Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, HBO Max, and I'll even be taking a look at the upcoming Paramount Plus, which is set to debut in mid-March. And I'll be giving you my opinions on which ones are worth having from a film standpoint. And another point of clarification, the criteria I'm basing this off of, the ones being the worst from the ones being the best, are solely as they relate to film content. I know we're living in a golden age of television, and there are a lot of streaming platforms that are popular due to the episodic series that they provide their subscribers. But for the sake of this conversation, we're going to keep it solely to the original films that they're producing, in addition to the other film properties they have in their library. So while there are streaming platforms out there that would score exceedingly high in terms of the content they provide in a episodic format, we are solely going to be focusing in on ones that deliver the highest content in terms of film and their movie library. So you are not going to want to miss it. We will be right back, and I will see you on the other side.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We just finished talking about the long-awaited sequel, Coming to America, based on the film the same name from 1988. This one again stars Eddie Murphy, and will be available to audiences March 5th on Amazon Prime Video. Again, in an age where everything gets a sequel, it will be interesting to see how a film set 33 years after the original follows up and adds to the original story. So be sure to check that one out. Right now, however, I really wanted to get to a topic that I've been interested in for a while now, and that is what streaming services, of the almost 500 million there are to choose from now, are worth having from a film standpoint. And again, I touched on this a little bit in the previous segment. I'm only going to be judging streaming services on what they have to offer in terms of feature-length films. So even though there are streaming services that have a lot to offer in terms of series quality, that is not going to be taken account for the purposes of this conversation. Also, I'm not going to be doing every single streaming service there is because, like I said, there's far too many to even keep track of them. So the ones I will be covering will be Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime Video, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Peacock, the soon-to-be available Paramount Plus, and Apple TV Plus. And I'll just start off by saying that Apple TV Plus is by far the worst one in terms of movie quality. Not only do they have one of the smallest movie libraries of streaming services that are available to the public, but the original films they've made are just, quite frankly, uncompelling. The most interesting one I've seen that they've produced is The Banker, which stars Anthony Mackie and Samuel L. Jackson. But from there, their original works really take a dive off a cliff in terms of quality. It is very inexpensive at $4.95 a month, but with so many film studios coming out with their own streaming platforms in the last few years, and subsequently reclaiming the distribution rights to their intellectual property, Apple TV Plus is really left with not much of a film inventory. Again, this is a platform that has a lot to offer in terms of episodic series, but that is not factoring into this ranking. So of the major streaming platforms out there, I deem Amazon Plus TV the least worthy of having. Moving on to the second lowest ranked streaming platform, we have Hulu coming in, which is a real shame because Hulu was one of the original streaming services, and it really helped pave the way for the modern streaming marketplace that we know today. But again, with different companies coming out with their own streaming platforms, and there being less need for a third-party distributor, Hulu has probably been one of the companies that has suffered the most because of that. Though they are owned by Disney, and is available through the many permutations of the Disney bundle, where you can get Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN, Hulu just doesn't offer enough original content in terms of movies. With one notable exception being Palm Springs, which starred Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti, Hulu just doesn't offer enough original feature films. And on top of that, they don't even have that large a library of movies in general. So for that, they are ranked second to last out of the major streaming services. Again, they do provide value in their original series, but in terms of producing feature-length films, it just doesn't cut it. And as we move further along the list, making our way to the best streaming services to have, the next one in line is Amazon Prime Video. This streaming service is being very innovative in terms of the original films that they are pumping out. One of the most recent offerings they had was One Night in Miami. And the new model that Amazon is offering of having premieres completely online without their films reaching theaters is going to be interesting to see going forward, and how other studios and streaming platforms respond and adapt to it. And I also give credit to Amazon Studios for really pushing the envelope with their content. Being an online streaming service, they don't have any ratings, so they don't have to necessarily censor their content, and they're free to just let their creatives tell the story uninhibited. Whereas some of the larger streaming platforms with parent companies to answer to, while they're still delivering quality content, they do have rules they have to play by. And the fact that Amazon Prime is becoming this sort of haven for creatives to experiment and take chances with their work which ultimately results in unique content. And that is something the market is desperate for at this point. So while Amazon Studios is one of the youngest media companies in the world, they are definitely carving out a space for themselves in the film industry. And I'm sure their standing will only improve given time. But moving on, as we reach the halfway point of this list, this one is a bit of a cheat, given that I'm ranking Paramount Plus, the fourth best streaming platform, which is a bit of a bold claim, given that it's not even available to the public at the time of recording this podcast. But the reason I'm ranking it so high is just Paramount's proven track record on making films going back even beyond the time when there were streaming platforms. To give a few examples of films that Paramount Studios has produced, they are responsible for movies like Titanic, Transformers, Forrest Gump, the Star Trek franchise, the Mission Impossible franchise. And long before Disney acquired the MCU, they were the ones that produced the first two Iron Man films. Now, they're not going to have access to the MCU catalog, but given the business model of these streaming platforms where all the films going forward from Paramount are going to be available on this platform, and when the distribution rights agreements with other streaming platforms that currently host their content expire and revert back to Paramount, they're only going to have a bigger movie library. So while this streaming platform has yet to debut, and it is set to debut on March 4th, for those who are interested, the rich catalog of films that you're going to have access to right off the bat with Paramount Plus, and knowing that catalog is only going to get bigger over time, I think that Paramount Plus is worthy of being ranked the fourth best streaming service right out of the gate. So again, for any of those interested in subscribing to Paramount Plus, it is available March 4th. Moving on to a streaming platform with a bit more of a proven track record is Peacock. And again, this ranking is attributed to the vastness of their movie catalog, given that this is the platform that all Universal Pictures are distributed on, and just the overall quality of them. To give you an idea of what's available on Peacock, you can see films like Schindler's List, The Producers, The Deer Hunter, Public Enemies, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Apollo 13, Dallas Buyers Club, and they are also home to the entire Harry Potter franchise. So again, this is a streaming platform that has the benefit of a studio like Universal behind it that has been making movies for over 100 years, in addition to all the series they have through NBC and their other subsidiaries. But keeping it to their film catalog, I am ranking Peacock as the fourth best streaming service out there, mostly due to their large library of classics they have, but they are a platform that is constantly adding to their library and building on their legacy. But Peacock falls just outside the top three, and ranking these next three in order was probably the toughest part of this entire exercise. But coming in at number 3, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to start having issues with my rankings if they haven't already with this one, coming in at number 3 is Disney Plus. And it was tough ranking them at number 3, given all the classic Disney films they have in their catalog, how they're coming out with live-action adaptations that are completely redefining what is possible through CGI, and how they are home to the entire MCU. Not to mention the fact that in 2020 they brought audiences an on-screen adaptation of the musical Hamilton. There are definitely a lot of positives with Disney Plus. And honestly, I think if you have any of the top 3 streaming services that I mentioned, you probably have all of them. So honestly, it's not that big a deal. The top 3 really just came down to splitting hairs and a matter of my personal opinion. And if I was ranking this list in terms of family entertainment, Disney Plus would definitely be on the top of the list. But in this instance, they have to settle for the bronze medal. And one thing I did take into consideration, which is something I touched on a little bit earlier, is just the rules that some platforms and studios have to operate by. For instance, Disney has a blanket rule that no characters in any of their films can ever be seen smoking, which is commendable. The fact that they are child entertainment and they're not trying to have that image in any of their content as not to influence younger viewers to copy that behavior. But having rules like that really limits you from a storytelling perspective. And the streaming platforms that are ranked in the top 2 aren't bogged down by rules like that. So for that reason, they rank ahead of Disney Plus. But again, I think Disney Plus is a tremendous platform, and it is definitely worth having. But moving on to the platforms I deemed the top 2, And the penultimate streaming service worth having is kind of the one that started the whole media landscape we're in today, and that is Netflix. And again, Netflix is relatively young in terms of producing its own original content, but they are pushing boundaries with their original content. As I was talking about early in the show with the film Moxie, they aren't afraid to tackle taboo subjects like sexual harassment among teenage girls, no less. And they really let their creatives flesh out and make their story their own. And I don't rank them so high solely because they're pushing the envelope with their content, but because they're producing quality content at the highest level. Marriage Story, that came out a few years ago, was nominated for multiple Academy Awards. And the film that is receiving a ton of acclaim this year is The Trial of the Chicago 7. So not only are they producing some of the most unique, free-flowing content in terms of movies being made today, but they're also producing some of the highest quality content in film today. And for those reasons, they take the second ranking in this ranking of the best streaming platforms. And moving on to the number one ranking, which for people paying attention at home, it is fairly obvious which is ranked number one, and that would be HBO Max. And of the elements I mentioned earlier with different streaming platforms, HBO Max does have the benefit of being owned by a company that has been producing films for almost 100 years in Warner Brothers, and they own some of the most valuable intellectual properties on the planet, in addition to providing some of the highest quality production value in their films. Without even going into the catalog that they currently have of movies, here's just a list of films that they're going to be premiering this year. And those films include Space Jam: A New Legacy, Matrix, Godzilla vs. Kong, Dune, Zack Snyder's Justice League, and The Suicide Squad. That is just what they're debuting this year. And yes, a lot of things changed due to the pandemic, but that doesn't change the fact that HBO has some of the most valuable, high-quality content being produced currently. And again, this isn't even taking into account the wealth of episodic series they have to offer. This number one ranking is based solely on their film catalog. So for film lovers everywhere, HBO Max is the quintessential streaming service that you need to make sure you have access to some of the highest quality, highest production value films that are being produced today. So there you have it, a ranking of the major streaming services available today. And recapping that from worst to best, we have Apple TV Plus, Hulu, Amazon Prime Video, the yet-to-debut Paramount Plus, which again will be available March 4th, Peacock, Disney Plus, Netflix, and HBO Max. That is my opinion on what the best streaming platforms are available today. Would love to hear your opinion, so be sure to tweet me at GSMC_movies. And thank you to everyone who is listening to this podcast. Again, right now is a tough time for the movie industry, but each episode I want to make sure that I'm bringing you the absolute best that there is available right now. And be sure to tune into the next episode where we will be going over the winners of the Golden Globe Awards. We will be taking a look at each category and what we thought of the winners. So you definitely don't want to miss that. And we will also be taking a look at some of the best upcoming releases. And again, I can't stress enough that this is definitely a tough time for the film industry with so many projects being delayed, canceled, and there only being a select few movies that are even worth talking about. But again, my goal is to make sure I'm finding the best movies out there and bringing them to the listeners that I have. And to all those listening, I can't thank you enough for your support. I want to make sure that each episode I'm bringing you quality content and enlightening you to some of the best films that are available for consumption. And I promise to all of you listening that later in the year, it is going to get better. There are a lot more quality films set to come out later in the year. Until then, we just have to power through. I'll make sure that I'm looking for the best and most interesting films in the meantime. And for everyone who is sticking with me through this, I can't express how much I appreciate your support, and I only hope that I'm turning you on to quality content that you will enjoy. But until next time, I want to say thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would also like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show, and be sure to write us a nice review. Really helps us a lot. Also, if you can, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you very much. Until next time, I've been Richard McDonough.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.